Why does Tchaikovsky still move millions of hearts around the world? What makes his music unforgettable, even hundreds of years later? Subscribe now and discover the story behind the genius that no one can repeat. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky was not born a genius. At least, no one around him believed so. To the world he entered in 1840, he was simply another child in a large, ordinary family of Russian imperial officials, destined to grow up, earn a respectable civil rank, and live the predictable life society had already outlined for him. But some lives refused to follow the blueprint. Even as a child, Pyotr felt the world too sharply. Sounds, emotions, glances, sudden changes in mood. Everything pierced him deeper than it did others. His mother's singing made him cry without understanding why. His father's calm voice soothed him more than any toy. And when he heard music, something inside him shifted, as if invisible doors opened into a universe no one else around him could sense. People often say geniuses are born, but Tchaikovsky was shaped by sensitivity so intense that it constantly threatened to overwhelm him, and shaped by a world completely unprepared for a child like him. His parents noticed his musical gift early, but they saw it the way most families saw music at that time. A pleasant talent, a cultural ornament, something good for entertainment, but not a real profession. Russia in the mid-19th century was not a place where a musician could count on stability. Music was a luxury, government service was life. So at the age of 10, Pyotr was sent to the Imperial School of Jurisprudence, a strict, cold institution that trained boys to become officials of the empire. Imagine a sensitive, artistic child suddenly thrown into a world of discipline, uniforms, hierarchy, and emotional suppression. The rules were rigid, the expectations were suffocating. Weakness, sentimentality, tears, all forbidden, all mocked. But what do you do if your entire being is built from emotion? At night, when his classmates slept, Pyotr would sit alone in the dormitory, whispering melodies to himself, recreating the music echoing in his mind. He learned early how to hide his inner world. He smiled when needed, obeyed orders, performed his duties. But inside, he was drowning. He became excellent at pretending. It was a survival skill he would use for the rest of his life. After graduation, Tchaikovsky entered the Ministry of Justice. It was a path of stability, respect, and a clear future. Everything a young man should want. But inside the ministry walls, surrounded by piles of documents and endless bureaucracy, Pyotr realized something terrifying. If he stayed, his soul would wither. Not metaphorically, literally. Music was not a hobby, it was oxygen. The more he forced himself to live a normal life, the more he felt something inside collapsing. He wrote in his letters that he lived between two worlds, the one society demanded and the one that kept him alive. Then, suddenly, came the turning point. The newly opened St. Petersburg Conservatory announced enrollment. Tchaikovsky hesitated. He was already 22, considered too old to begin a professional musical career. But the thought of remaining an official felt like a slow death. So he jumped. He quit everything. He walked away from stability, from expectations, from the life designed for him. People called it irresponsible, reckless, naive. But in that moment, Pyotr did something few people ever do. He chose his soul over his future. Life at the conservatory was brutal. He worked until exhaustion, slept little, studied obsessively. His teachers quickly realized he was not like the others. He wasn't simply learning harmony and counterpoint. He was absorbing the emotional meaning behind every chord. His sensitivity, once a weakness, became a weapon. But sensitivity has a price. Criticism wounded him deeply. Self-doubt haunted him. The fear of failure grew with every composition he wrote. When his first symphony was criticized by his mentors, he spiraled into anxiety so intense that it affected his health. But even through despair, Tchaikovsky couldn't stop. Because by then, music was not his career. It was his only form of survival. His early professional years were unstable. Money was scarce, concerts unpredictable. Russia had little financial support for composers. Pyotr often lived on the edge of poverty, working day and night, writing music while battling insomnia, nervous breakdowns, and overwhelming despair. And then came the moment that nearly destroyed him completely. His marriage. He entered it for the wrong reasons, hoping the stability of family life would silence the internal storms he fought daily. But the opposite happened. The marriage collapsed within weeks. Pyotr found himself at the edge of psychological breakdown. He fled, literally ran, from a life he could not endure. It was a crisis that could have ended everything. But this is where fate stepped in the form of Nadezhda von Meck, a wealthy widow, a passionate admirer of music, and a woman who recognized genius when she saw it. She began supporting Tchaikovsky financially with one condition: they would never meet in person. And strangely, this arrangement became one of the most important relationships of his life. Her support gave him freedom, and freedom gave birth to masterpieces: Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, the Nutcracker, Eugene Onegin, the Fifth Symphony, the Sixth Symphony, Pathétique. Music that defines eras. Music the world cannot forget. But here's what many people don't realize. Swan Lake was not an instant success. Critics dismissed it. Viewers didn't understand it. Tchaikovsky suffered deeply. But he continued, and decades later, Swan Lake became the most iconic ballet ever written. The Nutcracker also failed at its premiere. Now it is the musical symbol of Christmas worldwide. This pattern followed him everywhere: pain, creation, misunderstanding, immortality. Tchaikovsky's secret was simple. He didn't write with intellect. He wrote with his nerves, with his fears, his longing, his loneliness, his hope. He wrote from the deepest part of the human spirit, the part most people try to hide. That is why his music feels alive. It is not a performance, it is a confession. His death remains a mystery. Cholera, suicide, something else entirely. Historians still debate it. But what is clear is that in the final months of his life, Tchaikovsky wrote as if he knew the end was near. His Sixth Symphony, the Pathétique, sounds like a farewell letter written in sound. When he performed it for the first time, the audience didn't understand. But Tchaikovsky understood. He knew he had poured into it everything he could no longer say in words. 9 days later, he was gone. And yet, his music remains. It breathes, it cries, it loves, it aches, it survives. Because Tchaikovsky did not write for critics, for scholars, or for the elite. He wrote for anyone who has felt deeply, too deeply, to put emotion into words. That is why his music still lives. That is why his name stands among the greatest. That is why he is a phenomenon the world will never be able to repeat. After Nadezhda von Meck became his patroness, Tchaikovsky's life changed forever. The freedom to compose without fear of hunger or societal pressure became his true salvation, and he used it fully. Every new work he created was like a revelation, a confession of feelings he could not express with words, an attempt to survive the chaos inside his own soul. Ballets that became legendary Swan Lake, tragedy and beauty in every note. The first performance went almost unnoticed. Critics were harsh. But Tchaikovsky believed that music would find its way to the people, and it did. The Nutcracker, celebration, magic, childhood joy. No one could imagine then that decades later, its music would become a symbol of Christmas worldwide. The Sleeping Beauty, luxury, royal grace, and a fairy tale atmosphere. This is music that makes magic tangible. In each ballet, story, drama, emotion. He did not just write music. He told stories without words, symphonies, and the depth of his soul. Tchaikovsky's symphonies are not just musical compositions. They are open letters, confessions, and philosophy wrapped in sound. Symphony number 4. A man's struggle with fate. Dramatic, emotional, like a diary of the soul. Every recurring theme hits like a heartbeat. Symphony number 6, Pathétique, a farewell to life, confession, and tragedy. Its premiere was only 9 days before Tchaikovsky's death. Every note is a breath that will never repeat. Personal life and struggle. Tchaikovsky was a man who suffered from loneliness, depression, and misunderstanding. He could not be himself in a society that condemned his sensitivity and sexuality. His marriages and relationships often ended in tragedy. But music became his salvation. He wrote to survive. He wrote to endure the inner storms. He wrote to leave a mark that would outlive him. Why he still lives today, even now, hundreds of years later, people recognize his music in the first notes. Even without words, it conveys emotions everyone understands. Even without context, it touches the heart, makes us cry, and feel joy at the same time. Because Tchaikovsky wrote not for critics, not for scholars, not for the elite. He wrote for the human heart, for anyone who has ever felt too deeply to put emotion into words. And that is why his music will never die. It carries the storm, the beauty, and the soul of a man who felt the world too deeply. It is immortal. Tchaikovsky's music lives on, speaking to anyone who has ever felt too much. Every note is a confession, a storm, a soul poured into sound. Subscribe to dive even deeper into the world of music history and timeless masterpieces.